Colin on Kaitlin. We were only in a relationship because of shared business interests. Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Now, you may or may not remember in the early days of this case, I speculated on the reasons 35-year-old champion rider Colin Strickland was with 34-year-old yoga instructor Kaitlin Armstrong. And one of the reasons that I sort of posited was, could it be financial? It's not easy making a living as a professional athlete, even if you're successful, and the type of sport that Colin was active in is somewhat obscure. As early as May 25th, which is almost a month ago now, I took note that the affidavit says lives with his girlfriend, and I was sort of speculating, is she living with him or is he living with her? And what do you think the answer is to that now, a month later? Of the three vehicles, this was something else that stood out in the affidavit. Hers is the newest and I presume the most expensive. So it remains an open question. Well, it was an open question then. Who is the wealthier partner? And at that time, I asked, what was the attraction between Strickland and Armstrong? And why were things sort of not working out? Was it because he was becoming more successful? Or was it because she had all the money? Now, if you look at the vehicles, he owns a 2002 BMW motorcycle and a 1998 Mercedes, whereas she owns a 2012 Jeep Grand Cherokee. And if you think about those vehicles, which one do you think is worth the most? And that, I think, is the bottom line. So it's easy to see how 35-year-old champion rider Colin Strickland had more in common with 25-year-old Mo Wilson. She was very keen on him, and if Colin and Mo had elite cycling and sponsors and similar motivations in common, then what was drawing him back to Kaitlin? Before we get to the rest of this episode, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind there'll be a live stream on this channel as well tomorrow at 3 p.m. Central Time. And in order to participate in chat, you'll need to be a subscriber. So hit the subscribe button, like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So the fact is, Kaitlin wasn't just a yoga instructor as reported in the media. She has a background in realty with her sister Christy. The properties she owns, and in one case co-owns with Colin in Austin, are worth, wait for it, $2.026 million. That's in terms of the appraisal value. So over $2 million. Just yesterday, the Sun quoted Strickland saying, quote, he only got back together with murder suspect Kaitlin Armstrong, 34, after his fling with pro cyclist Mo Wilson because they shared business interests, end quote. Meaning he shared business interests with Kaitlin, and that's why they kind of stayed together. So here's the part that doesn't make sense, and I don't think you need true crime rocket science to figure this out. If he was only with Kaitlin because of business interests, and if he wasn't really in love with her, then why would Colin's excursion with Mo to the Deep Eddy pool on May 11th, why would it need to be platonic? Why would it be platonic? I mean, it sounds like he wasn't really into either of these women from his versions of events, and yet they both seem to be under the impression he was their man. I think the reality of relationships of convenience is that they are unfulfilling. They have a practical benefit, but they ultimately don't do it for the person that's in it, and ultimately one person is using another person. They're there for the utility. This often leads to cheating, because the user is still not getting what they really want. They're not getting, let's say, emotional satisfaction. Ironically, by straying, but also staying in a relationship, there's actually a sense of using two people, the one you're with and the one you're cheating with. Now, we know that Mo wasn't really doing very well. I think it's fair to say she was struggling financially. She was actually in the process of leaving her job. I think she'd actually just left her job at Specialized, and she was trying to get sponsors. And obviously she was well on her way to making a successful career, but she wasn't there yet. And so Colin was supposedly giving her advice on how to attract sponsors. Well, if poor Mo was alive today, Colin would be the poster child on how not to attract sponsors, one would imagine. But in this scenario where Colin was using Kaitlin, or was it a relationship of convenience, let's say financial convenience, and if much of the financial burden was Kaitlin's, and if Kaitlin had worked shit hard to pull herself up from humble beginnings, only to find herself with someone who wanted to have his cake and eat it, one can imagine that leading to feelings of anger and righteous indignation. Wouldn't you be upset? Wouldn't you feel used? Curiously, Colin now also seems to be throwing Kaitlin under the bus, saying Kaitlin also saw other men. This is another quote from The Sun. This is what he said to them. He said, quote, "I had ended the relationship with Kaitlin and it was just interesting timing because Mo had come to Austin to visit a friend that exact week. It was completely unplanned and yeah, we started spending some time together," end quote. But the events of May 11th weren't completely unplanned, were they? And regardless of whether Kaitlin was seeing other men, the issue is whether he was cheating on Kaitlin while they were in a relationship on the day Mo was murdered. Clearly, Kaitlin didn't like that, and it seems he knew that. Going back to the article, quote, "That was clearly expressed to Kaitlin at that time, and Kaitlin dated other men directly after that. We were clearly going our separate ways, but we just didn't get enough inertia to separate," end quote. Now, I have to say, as a writer of many books, Colin's word choices strike me as funny. Not funny amusing, funny peculiar. In my previous analysis, basically in the previous video, I highlighted a word I've not seen before, and to be honest, I wasn't 100% sure it was a word to begin with. Retrospection. It turns out it is a word, but it's not one I've ever used before. And now here, he's talking about not getting enough inertia to separate. Does he know what inertia means? Inertia means passivity or inactivity. I think he means the opposite, momentum or drive or motivation to leave one another. But the fact that he seems to be trying to use fancy words to sell his story or to tell his story speaks to me of being a little bit disingenuous in the middle of a serious crisis. The fact that he's using words he doesn't seem to know the meaning of makes it hard to take him seriously, and his credibility right now is an issue. So I'm not going to take it further than that. Tomorrow I'll have a special guest on, a resident from Austin. I'll provide a link in the description so that you can make sure you don't miss tomorrow's live stream discussion. In order to participate in chat, you're going to need to be a subscriber. So make sure you are subscribed if you want to ask questions or leave comments. The resident from Austin who's a guest was once referred to as the king of Twitter, according to the New York Times. He's also a local Austin cyclist, fitness instructor, and a web host developer. He's got quite a deep voice, really a great voice for radio. So I'm looking forward to speaking to him and getting a sense of what things feel like on the ground in Austin. Besides that, we also want to take a proper look at Mo Wilson. Who was she? I think we've spent a lot of time getting to know Kaitlin and also Colin. And I think it's time that we direct our attention to the person at the epicenter of this terrible tragedy. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.